I never thought I'd be the kind of man who destroyed his own life with his own two hands. I always believed that if ruin ever came for me, it would arrive from the outside, a layoff, an illness, some cruel twist of fate beyond my control. But that's not how it happened. The truth is far more shameful. I was the architect of my own devastation. I built the bomb, set the timer, and then sat in my own living room watching the seconds tick down, doing nothing to stop it. And the worst part, the part that still wakes me up at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat with my heart pounding against my ribs, is that I knew exactly what I was doing. Every step of the way, I knew. My name is Marcus, and this is the confession I've been carrying for 3 years. I've never told anyone the full story. Not my therapist, not my brother, not even the lawyers who handled my divorce. They all got fragments, carefully curated pieces designed to make me look like less of a monster than I actually was. But tonight, I'm done protecting myself. Tonight, I'm going to tell you everything, every selfish decision, every moment of weakness, every lie I told myself to justify what I was doing, because if I don't get this out of me, I think it might finally kill me. It started 7 years ago when my wife Natalie and I bought our house in Westbrook Gardens. It was one of those quiet suburban developments about 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of neighborhood where people wave at each other from their driveways and kids ride bikes until the street lights come on. Natalie fell in love with it the moment we pulled up for the viewing. She stood on the front lawn, 8 months pregnant with our daughter Lily, and she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "This is it, Marcus. This is where we're going to raise our family." I remember nodding, squeezing her hand, feeling this overwhelming sense of pride and terror all at once. We'd worked so hard to get to that moment. I'd just been promoted to senior account manager at the marketing firm where I'd spent the last 6 years climbing the ladder. Natalie had built her own interior design business from the ground up, working late nights and weekends until she'd finally reached a point where she could pick and choose her clients. We were living the dream. At least, that's what I told myself. But there was something else there, too. Something I didn't want to acknowledge. A restlessness that I couldn't quite name. A feeling that despite everything we'd achieved, something was missing. I told myself it was just nerves about becoming a father. I told myself it would pass once the baby arrived and we settled into our new life. I was wrong about a lot of things back then, but I was especially wrong about that. Lily was born 3 weeks after we moved in, and for a while, everything really was perfect. I'd come home from work to find Natalie in the nursery, rocking our daughter and singing softly, and I'd feel this surge of love so powerful it almost hurt. We spent weekends unpacking boxes, hanging pictures, turning that empty house into a home. Our neighbors started stopping by with casseroles and bottles of wine, welcoming us to the community. It felt like we'd finally arrived at the life we'd always wanted. The house next door had been empty when we moved in. The previous owners had relocated to Florida, and it had been sitting on the market for months. I didn't think much about it, just figured it would sell eventually and we'd get some nice family as neighbors. Maybe another couple with young kids, someone Lily could grow up with. But that's not who moved in. It was a Thursday in late September when the moving truck pulled up. I was working from home that day, sitting at my desk in the spare room we'd converted into an office, when I heard the rumble of the engine. I glanced out the window and saw a woman directing the movers, pointing toward the front door, her dark hair catching the afternoon light. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, and there was something about the way she moved that made it hard to look away. Confident, self-assured, like she knew exactly who she was and didn't care what anyone else thought about it. Her name was Claire Ashford, and she had just gone through a divorce. I learned this the following weekend when Natalie insisted we go over and introduce ourselves. She brought a bottle of wine and her warmest smile, determined to make our new neighbor feel welcome. I stood there on Claire's front porch, watching the two of them chat like old friends, and I felt something shift inside me. Something I should have recognized as a warning sign. Claire was beautiful in a way that Natalie wasn't. That's not a criticism of my wife. Natalie was stunning in her own right, with her soft features and kind eyes, and the gentle way she carried herself. But Claire was different. There was an edge to her beauty, something sharp and dangerous. Her eyes were a deep green, almost emerald, and when she looked at you, it felt like she was seeing straight through to whatever you were trying to hide. She told us she'd moved from the city after her divorce, wanting a fresh start somewhere quieter. Her ex-husband had been a corporate lawyer, she said, and the settlement had left her comfortable enough that she didn't need to work for a while. She was planning to spend some time figuring out what she wanted to do next. Maybe travel, maybe write. She'd always wanted to write a book. I nodded along, asking polite questions, trying not to notice the way her dress fell just above her knees or how her laugh seemed to vibrate somewhere deep in my chest. Natalie was doing most of the talking anyway. She was always better at that than me, making connections, drawing people out. By the time we left, she'd already invited Claire over for dinner the following Saturday. "She seems lovely," Natalie said as we walked back across our lawn. "A little sad, maybe, but lovely. I think she just needs some friends." "Yeah," I said. "She seems nice." I should have told Natalie the truth right then. I should have said that something about Claire made me uncomfortable, that I thought we should keep our distance. But I didn't. Because even then, some dark part of me wanted to see where this would go. And that was my first betrayal. Not of Natalie, but of myself. I betrayed my own instincts, my own better judgment, all because I was curious about a beautiful woman who'd moved in next door. The dinner happened the following Saturday, and Claire was charming. She brought an expensive bottle of red wine and a dessert she'd made herself, a chocolate torte that melted on your tongue. She complimented our home, cooed over pictures of Lily, asked Natalie thoughtful questions about her design business. She was the perfect guest, and by the end of the night, my wife was already planning future get-togethers. Over the next few months, Claire became a regular presence in our lives. She and Natalie grew close. Sunday brunches, afternoon shopping trips, long phone calls that lasted hours. I told myself this was a good thing. Natalie deserved a close friend nearby, someone she could talk to when I was working late or traveling for business. And Claire was always around, always ready to help with Lily or keep Natalie company when I couldn't be there. But there were moments, small ones, fleeting ones, when I'd catch Claire looking at me in a way that didn't feel quite right. A gaze that lingered just a beat too long. A smile that seemed to hold a secret. I'd tell myself I was imagining things, that I was being arrogant to think a woman like her would be interested in someone like me. But I wasn't imagining things. I know that now. Claire knew exactly what she was doing from the very beginning. It started with conversations. She'd come over to see Natalie, but Natalie would be upstairs putting Lily down for a nap, and Claire would find me in the kitchen or the living room, and we'd talk. Just talk. About life, about work, about books and movies, and the state of the world. She was incredibly intelligent, well-read in a way that I found intimidating and attractive in equal measure. She'd challenge my opinions, push back when she disagreed, engage with me in a way that made me feel seen and understood. And that's the thing no one tells you about affairs. They don't start with a kiss or a touch or some explosive moment of passion. They start with conversations. They start with feeling like someone truly gets you. They start with tiny moments of connection that seem innocent on the surface but are building towards something devastating. I began looking forward to seeing her. I'd find myself disappointed when I came home and she wasn't there. I started paying more attention to my appearance, wondering if she'd notice if I wore a nicer shirt or got a fresh haircut. I was behaving like a teenager with a crush, and I was too blind or too selfish to see the danger in it. The first time something physical happened was on a Tuesday evening in March. Natalie had taken Lily to visit her parents for the week, and I'd stayed behind because of a major presentation at work. I was exhausted, stressed about the pitch I had to deliver the next morning when there was a knock at the door. It was Claire, holding a bottle of whiskey and asking if I wanted some company. I should have said no. I should have told her I had work to do, that it wasn't appropriate, that I needed to be alone. But I didn't. I let her in, poured us both drinks, and before I knew it, we were sitting on the couch, talking like we always did, except this time there was no Natalie upstairs, no baby monitor crackling in the corner. It was just us. At some point, I still don't remember exactly how, she put her hand on my knee. It was such a small gesture, almost nothing, but it sent a current through me that I can still feel to this day. I looked at her, and she looked at me, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. "We shouldn't," I said. My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from someone else. "I know," she whispered, "but I want to, don't you?" I did. God help me, I did. What happened that night is something I've replayed in my mind thousands of times. I've tried to find the exact moment when I could have stopped it, when I could have walked away and saved everything I was about to destroy. But the truth is, there wasn't a single moment. It was a series of choices, each one leading to the next, each one pulling me further from the man I thought I was. When Natalie came home at the end of that week, I was a different person. Not outwardly. I still kissed her at the door, still held Lily in my arms and breathed in that perfect baby smell. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. I had become a liar. I had crossed a line that I never thought I would cross, and instead of feeling like a monster, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. That's the part I'm most ashamed of. Not just that I cheated on my wife, but that I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the thrill of having a secret, the excitement of sneaking next door when Natalie thought I was working late, the intoxicating feeling of being desired by someone new. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was living outside the rules, and I was addicted to that feeling. The affair continued for almost a year. Claire and I developed routines, methods of communication that wouldn't raise suspicion. We'd meet at her house when Natalie was at work or out with Lily. We'd exchange coded texts, innocent on the surface but loaded with meaning only we understood. I became an expert at living a double life, compartmentalizing my guilt so effectively that there were whole days when I almost forgot what I was doing, but the guilt was always there, waiting in the shadows. It would hit me at unexpected moments, watching Natalie laugh at something on television, feeling her curl into me at night, seeing her interact with Claire like they were the best of friends. The woman I was betraying, and the woman I was betraying her with, sitting at my kitchen table, sharing a bottle of wine, and talking about their plans for the holidays. It was surreal. It was torture. And it was entirely my own doing. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario. What if Natalie found out? What if Claire got tired of being the other woman and demanded I leave my wife? What if someone saw us together and word got back to the neighborhood? The anxiety was relentless, a constant hum in the back of my mind that I couldn't escape. And yet I didn't stop. That's what I still can't understand about myself. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew it was destroying me from the inside, but I kept going back to her, again and again, like an addict who knows the drug is killing him but can't put down the needle. The first real crack appeared about 8 months into the affair. Natalie came home from a doctor's appointment with news that should have made me ecstatic. She was pregnant again. We'd been talking about having another child, giving Lily a sibling, and here it was, exactly what we'd planned. But when she told me, wrapping her arms around my neck and beaming up at me with pure joy, all I felt was panic, because I realized in that moment that I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't bring another child into a family built on lies. I couldn't look at a newborn baby knowing that I'd been sneaking next door to sleep with our neighbor while their mother was pregnant. Something had to change. I told Claire we needed to stop. I sat her down and explained that the pregnancy changed things, that I couldn't risk my family anymore, that what we had, whatever it was, needed to end. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable, and when I finished, she simply nodded. "If that's what you want," she said. "It is," I told her. "I'm sorry." She looked at me for a long moment, and something flickered in her eyes that I couldn't quite identify. Hurt? Anger? Or something else entirely? Then she smiled, that same smile that had drawn me in from the very beginning. We all make choices, Marcus. I hope you can live with yours. I left her house that night feeling relieved, like I'd finally done the right thing after months of doing everything wrong. I told myself that the worst was over, that I could bury this secret and move forward, that I could become the husband and father I was supposed to be. But that's when the guilt really started to consume me. See, I'd expected that ending the affair would make me feel better. I thought the weight of the secret would lift, that I'd be able to look Natalie in the eye without feeling like I was going to shatter into 1,000 pieces. But it was the opposite. Without the distraction of Claire, without the adrenaline of living a double life, I was forced to sit with what I'd done. Really sit with it. And it was unbearable. I couldn't stop thinking about all the times I'd lied. Every "I love you" that had come out of my mouth while I was still seeing Claire. Every kiss, every embrace, every moment of intimacy that had been tainted by my betrayal. I started to see my entire marriage as a fraud, a house of cards that could collapse at any moment if Natalie ever learned the truth. My behavior changed in ways I couldn't control. I became distant, irritable, quick to snap at minor annoyances. I stopped wanting to be intimate with Natalie, and when she reached for me at night, I'd make excuses. Too tired, too stressed, not feeling well. She noticed, of course. How could she not? But she attributed it to work pressure, to the anxiety of becoming a father again. She gave me the benefit of the doubt because she trusted me, because she had no reason not to. That trust was the knife that twisted deepest. I started drinking more than I should. A glass of whiskey became 2, became 3, became waking up on the couch at 2 in the morning with an empty bottle on the coffee table, and no memory of how I'd gotten there. I told myself I was managing the stress, that I just needed to take the edge off, but the truth was I was trying to drown the guilt. It didn't work. It never works. The guilt just learned to swim. Claire, for her part, kept her distance. She was cordial when we crossed paths, friendly when Natalie invited her over, but there was a coldness in her eyes when she looked at me now. A knowing look that made my stomach turn. She never said anything, never even hinted at what we'd done, but I knew she was holding it over me. The secret was a tether between us, invisible but unbreakable. Natalie gave birth to our son, Daniel, on a rainy Wednesday in November. I was in the delivery room, holding her hand, telling her to breathe, watching this miracle unfold before my eyes. And when the doctor placed that tiny, screaming baby on her chest, I felt something break inside me. Not in a bad way, or at least not entirely. It was like some dam I'd built to hold back my emotions suddenly cracked, and everything came flooding out. I cried harder than I'd ever cried in my life. Natalie thought it was joy, and part of it was, but most of it was grief. Grief for the man I used to be. Grief for the family I'd betrayed. Grief for the father my children deserved but would never have because of what I'd done. After Daniel was born, I told myself again that I could change. I threw myself into being present, changing diapers, taking night feedings, making sure Natalie knew how much I appreciated her. I was overcompensating, and somewhere deep down, I knew it. But I didn't know what else to do. The alternative was to confess, to tell her everything, and I wasn't brave enough for that. I was too afraid of losing her, losing our children, losing the life we'd built together. So I carried the secret, day after day, month after month, and it ate away at me like acid. My work started to suffer. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't muster the energy or creativity that my job required. I'd sit in meetings staring at spreadsheets without seeing them, my mind drifting to that night in March, to Claire's hand on my knee, to every choice I'd made that led me here. My performance reviews, once glowing, became mediocre. I was passed over for a promotion I'd been expecting. My boss started making comments about my lack of focus. At home, things were worse. Natalie and I fought more than we ever had before. Not about anything specific, about dishes left in the sink, about who forgot to take out the trash, about the kids' bedtimes and the state of the house. But the real issue, the elephant in every room, was the distance that had grown between us. She felt it, I felt it, and neither of us could name it because she didn't know what had caused it. The guilt manifested in physical symptoms. I developed chronic headaches, a tightness in my chest that doctors couldn't explain, an inability to eat that left me dropping weight I couldn't afford to lose. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself, gaunt, hollow-eyed, the shadow of the man I'd been before I moved to Westbrook Gardens and let temptation destroy me. I started therapy without telling Natalie. I found a counselor on the other side of the city, someone who had no connection to my life, and I sat in his office once a week trying to work through what I'd done, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him the full truth. I talked around it, describing guilt and anxiety and relationship problems without ever naming the source. He gave me coping strategies and breathing exercises and homework assignments, and none of it helped because I was still lying. I was lying to everyone, including myself. The breaking point came 2 years after the affair ended. Daniel was a toddler, Lily was starting kindergarten, and Natalie had just landed her biggest design contract yet, a complete renovation of a mansion in the wealthiest part of the county. She was so excited, so proud of how far her business had come. She wanted to celebrate, to go out to a nice dinner, just the two of us, while her parents watched the kids. I agreed, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. We went to a French restaurant downtown, the kind of place we'd gone on special occasions when we were first dating. Natalie looked beautiful in a dress she'd bought for the occasion, her eyes bright with happiness. She held my hand across the table and talked about her dreams for the future, expanding her business, maybe hiring some help, taking on even bigger projects. She talked about our kids, how wonderful they were growing up to be, how grateful she was that we'd built this life together. And then she said the words that finally broke me. "I'm so lucky to have you, Marcus. You're my rock. I don't know what I'd do without you." Something in me snapped. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sit there and accept her gratitude when I knew what I'd done to her. The guilt that I'd been carrying for years suddenly felt like a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I couldn't breathe. "I need to tell you something," I heard myself say. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could think about what I was doing. Natalie's expression shifted from happiness to concern. "What is it? Is something wrong?" And I told her. Not everything, I couldn't get it all out coherently, but enough. I told her there had been someone else. I told her it had happened years ago, and that it was over. I told her I was sorry, that I'd been carrying this guilt ever since, that I couldn't pretend anymore. The look on her face as the realization set in is something I will never, ever forget. It was like watching a light go out. Her eyes, which had been so bright just moments before, went dark and flat. Her hand withdrew from mine as if she'd been burned. "Who?" she whispered. "Who was it?" I should have lied. I should have made something up, some anonymous woman from a work trip, someone she'd never have to see again. But I was done lying. I was so tired of lying. "Claire," I said. It was Claire. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Natalie stared at me, her mouth slightly open, her mind clearly trying to process what I'd just told her. Claire, her friend, her confidant. The woman who'd come to our son's first birthday party and brought a gift she'd picked out herself. The woman who still lived next door, whose windows she could see from our kitchen. "How long?" Her voice was barely audible. "Almost a year, but it ended when you got pregnant with Daniel. I swear to you, it ended then, and I haven't. Get away from me. Natalie, please, get away from me right now." She stood up from the table so abruptly that her chair scraped against the floor, drawing stares from nearby diners. I watched, frozen, as she grabbed her purse and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty seat across from me, unable to move. The waiter came over eventually, asking if everything was all right. I paid the bill and left. When I got home, the house was empty. Natalie had already collected the kids from her parents' house and was gone. I called her phone a dozen times, leaving voicemails that ranged from pleading to desperate. She didn't respond. I paced the house all night, waiting for her to come back, rehearsing what I would say, how I would explain. But she didn't come back. Not that night. She went to her sister's house. I found this out when her sister called me the next morning, her voice cold with fury. "You're a piece of work, you know that?" She spat. "She doesn't want to talk to you. She needs time to figure out what she's going to do. Don't you dare show up here." I respected that wish, mostly because I didn't have a choice. I went to work in a daze, sat at my desk staring at nothing, left early when my boss asked if I was feeling okay. I drove past Claire's house on the way home and saw that her car was in the driveway. For one wild moment, I considered stopping, going to her door, demanding to know why she'd ever let me make such a devastating mistake. But I knew that was insane. She hadn't made me do anything. Every choice had been mine. Natalie came back 4 days later. She collected her things while I was at work, clothes, toiletries, the kids' favorite toys. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said she was filing for separation and that her lawyer would be in touch. Reading those words, in her familiar handwriting, was like a punch to the gut. But I knew I deserved it. I knew I deserved worse. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Natalie's lawyer was aggressive, determined to secure her the best possible outcome. And honestly, I didn't fight it. I felt like I owed her whatever she wanted. She got primary custody of the kids. I'd see them every other weekend, one evening a week. She got the house. I found a small apartment on the other side of town and moved into it with a suitcase and a profound sense of emptiness. But even losing everything wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was explaining to my children what had happened. Lily was 5, old enough to understand that Mommy and Daddy weren't going to live together anymore, but not old enough to understand why. She cried and asked if it was her fault, if she'd done something wrong. Holding her in my arms and assuring her that she was perfect, that none of this was because of her, was the most painful thing I've ever done. Daniel was too young to really understand. He just knew that Daddy's face was sad and that there was a new bedroom in a new place. He adapted quickly, the way young children do, but sometimes I catch him looking at me with a confusion that makes my heart ache. The community found out, of course. It's impossible to keep something like that quiet in a neighborhood like Westbrook Gardens. I don't know who told whom. Maybe Natalie's sister, maybe Natalie herself. But within weeks, everyone knew that I'd had an affair with Claire. The whispers followed me whenever I came to pick up the kids. Former friends stopped returning my calls. I became a pariah, the cautionary tale that mothers shared with their husbands late at night. And Claire? She moved away 6 months after everything came out, sold her house and relocated to another state, leaving nothing behind but memories and wreckage. I don't know if she ever felt guilty about what we did. I suspect she didn't. For her, I think it was just a temporary diversion, a way to pass the time while she figured out her next chapter. I was the one who had everything to lose. She had nothing at stake. In the years since, I've tried to rebuild some version of a life. I go to therapy, real therapy now, where I tell the full truth. I've worked through some of the reasons why I did what I did, the insecurities and restlessness that made me vulnerable to temptation. I've learned coping strategies that actually help. I've found ways to be present for my children during our limited time together. But the guilt never fully goes away. It's there when I wake up in my empty apartment. It's there when I see Natalie at school events, her eyes sliding past me like I'm a stranger. It's there when Lily asks, as she sometimes does, why I don't live with them anymore. I've tried to date again. Friends have set me up. I've tried apps, but it never goes anywhere. I can't open up to anyone new because I'm terrified of being the person I was during those months with Claire. I don't trust myself. How can I trust myself when I proved so conclusively that I'm capable of such devastating betrayal? The thing that haunts me most is that Natalie never saw it coming. She trusted me completely. In her mind, I was her partner, her co-parent, the person who would always have her back. And I exploited that trust in the worst way possible. Every time she was kind to Claire, every time she invited her into our home, she was welcoming in the very person who was helping to destroy her marriage. The cruelty of that, the sheer meanness of it, still makes me sick. I think about the moments when I could have made different choices. That night when Claire came over with the whiskey bottle, I could have said no. The first time she touched my knee, I could have moved away. Every single day of that affair, I could have stopped. I could have told the truth. I could have asked for help. But I didn't. I chose my own selfish desires over my wife, over my children, over everything I claimed to value. There's a particular memory that I return to often. It was during the affair, maybe 6 months in. Natalie, Claire, and I were having dinner at our house. The kids were in bed, and we were finishing a bottle of wine, just 3 friends enjoying each other's company. Or that's what it looked like from the outside. Natalie was telling a story about a client who'd made some ridiculous demand, and she was laughing, animated, her face flushed with wine and happiness. And Claire was laughing too, her hand casually resting on Natalie's arm in a gesture of friendship. But across the table, her eyes met mine, and there was something in her expression, a secret amusement, a knowledge that only we shared. We were both looking at this woman who trusted us, who loved us, and we were sharing a joke at her expense. That's the moment I hate myself for the most. Not the physical betrayal, that was bad enough, but the emotional one. The way Claire and I had made Natalie into the outsider in her own home. The way we'd turned her trust and friendship into something to be exploited. The cruelty of it still takes my breath away. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd never told her. If I'd kept the secret forever, taken it to my grave. Would our marriage have survived? Would I have eventually gotten over the guilt and found a way to be present again? Or would the corrosion have continued until everything fell apart anyway? I'll never know. Because in the end, I couldn't carry it anymore. The weight of the secret became heavier than the fear of losing everything. And so I confessed, and lost everything anyway. There's a particular kind of shame that comes with being the villain of your own story. When your marriage ends because your spouse cheated, you get sympathy. Friends rally around you, family provides support. You're the wounded party, the victim of someone else's betrayal. But when you're the one who cheated, when you're the reason your family fell apart, there's no sympathy. There's just judgment and disappointment, and a loneliness that feels endless. My brother was the hardest to face. He'd looked up to me our whole lives, saw me as someone who had figured things out. When I called to tell him what was happening, that Natalie was leaving me because I'd been unfaithful, there was this long silence on the other end of the phone, and then he just said, "I don't know what to say, Marcus. That doesn't sound like you at all. But that's the thing. It was me. That's the hardest part to accept. I wasn't possessed or drugged or blackmailed. I made those choices with full awareness of what they meant. The man who cheated on his wife with the woman next door. That's who I am. Or at least, that's who I was capable of becoming when temptation crossed my path. I've spent a lot of time in therapy trying to understand why. Not to excuse it, nothing can excuse it, but to understand it. And I've come to realize that the restlessness I felt wasn't about Natalie at all. It was about me. I had built this life that looked perfect from the outside, but I didn't know who I was inside it. I was a husband and a father and a successful professional, but I'd lost track of the person underneath all those roles. When Claire came along, she saw the version of me that existed before all that. Before the responsibilities and the mortgage and the carefully constructed image. She made me feel like an individual again, not just someone defined by his relationships to others. And I was so hungry for that feeling that I was willing to risk everything to keep it. It's not a good reason. It's not even a coherent one, but it's the closest I've come to understanding how I could have done what I did. 3 years have passed since the divorce was finalized. The kids are growing up. Lily is 8 now. Daniel is almost 4. I treasure every moment I get with them. knowing that I'm responsible for breaking their home apart. Every time I drop them back at the house that used to be mine, every time I watch them run up the driveway to their mother, I feel the full weight of what I've lost. Natalie has started dating again. I heard this through mutual acquaintances. We don't exactly have friendly conversations. She's seeing a man who works in finance, someone she met through a client. By all accounts, he's a good guy. He's good with the kids. He makes her happy. I should be glad for her. She deserves happiness after what I put her through. But I'd be lying if I said it doesn't hurt. Every time I imagine this other man in my old house, sitting at my old table playing with my children, something inside me twists. It's jealousy, I know that. But it's also grief. Grief for the life I could have had if I'd been strong enough to resist temptation. I still live in that small apartment. I still go to work every day, though I've moved to a different firm, a fresh start where no one knows my history. I still see my therapist once a week. I've built a routine, a quiet life that keeps me functional. But I wouldn't call it living, not really, it's more like surviving. Or, I've thought about what I would say to myself if I could go back to that night when Claire knocked on my door with the whiskey. I've rehearsed the speeches I'd give, the warnings I'd issue. Don't open the door. Call Natalie and tell her you miss her. Go to bed early and count your blessings. But we can't go back. We can only go forward, carrying the consequences of our choices. Sometimes I wonder if the guilt will ever fade. If there will come a day when I can look back on what I did without feeling this crushing weight in my chest. My therapist says that eventually I'll reach a place of acceptance, that the guilt will transform into something else, a lesson, a scar, but not the all-consuming pain it is now. I hope he's right, because I don't know how much longer I can carry this. The other day, Lily asked me a question that stopped me cold. We were having one of our evenings together, eating pizza and watching a movie, when she turned to me with her mother's eyes and asked, "Daddy, why did you and Mommy stop loving each other?" I wanted to explain that I never stopped loving her mother. That even now, even after everything, there's a part of me that will always love Natalie. But how do you explain that to a child? How do you tell your daughter that sometimes love isn't enough? That sometimes people make terrible choices that hurt the people they love most? I told her that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and those mistakes can change things between them. I told her that both her mother and I love her and Daniel more than anything in the world, and that would never change. I told her that just because Mommy and Daddy don't live together anymore doesn't mean they don't care about each other. She seemed to accept this, or at least she moved on to another topic. But later that night, after I'd dropped them off and driven back to my empty apartment, I sat in my car in the parking garage and cried. I cried for the family I'd broken. I cried for the childhood my children would have to navigate with 2 homes instead of 1. I cried for all the moments I'd miss, all the bedtimes and breakfast conversations and ordinary Tuesday afternoons that I'd never get back. And I cried for myself, too, for the man I used to be before I made the choice that changed everything, for the future I'd imagined. Growing old with Natalie, watching our grandchildren play in the backyard of our forever home, celebrating anniversaries and building memories together. All of it gone, all of it burned to ash by my own hand. There's a quote I read once, something about how we are all walking around carrying invisible burdens that others can't see. Sitting in that parking garage, I felt the full weight of mine. The affair, the guilt, the confession, the divorce, the aftermath, all of it pressing down on me like a physical weight. And I knew that I would carry this burden for the rest of my life. There was no putting it down, there was only learning to live with it. I'm telling you this story because I need someone to know. Not to seek sympathy, I don't deserve that. Not to ask for forgiveness, that's not mine to request. I'm telling you because the secret nearly destroyed me, and even now, years later, I'm still fighting to survive it. If there's anyone listening who's standing where I stood, who's looking at temptation and wondering if it's worth the risk, please, I'm begging you, walk away. Close the door. Don't answer the knock. Whatever momentary thrill you think you might gain is nothing compared to what you'll lose. I had everything: a beautiful wife who loved me, two healthy, happy children, a home, a career, a community, and I threw it all away for a year of stolen moments with a woman who didn't even stay. The math doesn't work. It never works. But I was too blind and too selfish to see it until it was far too late. The guilt didn't just ruin my home, it ruined me. It turned me into a person I don't recognize, a ghost haunting the edges of the life I used to have. And while I'm slowly learning to live again, to find meaning in small moments and hope in my children's faces, I know I'll never fully recover. That's the truth of betrayal. It doesn't just hurt the person you betray. It corrupts you from the inside out. It plants a seed of shame that grows and grows until it blocks out everything else. And no matter how much you water it with therapy and good intentions and earnest efforts to change, that seed never fully dies. It just waits, dormant, ready to remind you of exactly who you are. My name is Marcus Reed. I cheated on my wife with our neighbor. I carried the guilt until it consumed me. I confessed the truth and watched my family fall apart. And now I'm living with the consequences, alone in an apartment, seeing my children every other weekend, trying to find some version of myself that I can stand to look at in the mirror. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but I'm trying. One day at a time, one therapy session at a time, one tear-soaked night at a time, I'm trying to become someone my children can be proud of, even if that person will always carry the weight of what their father did. I wanted you to know the truth, all of it. The good and the bad, the excuses and the failures, the small moments that seemed insignificant, and the huge choices that changed everything. Because this is what guilt looks like from the inside. This is what it does to a person when they betray the ones they love. I hope, wherever you are, that you never have to learn this lesson for yourself. I hope you're stronger than I was. I hope you never know the particular agony of watching your life collapse because of choices you made, secrets you kept, lies you told. But if you do know, if you're carrying your own invisible burden, your own shameful secret, I hope my story helps somehow. Not as an excuse or a justification, but as proof that you're not alone, that others have walked this path and survived it, that the guilt doesn't have to be the end of you, even when it feels like it might be. It's late now, and the apartment is quiet. Outside my window, I can see the lights of other homes, other families going about their evening routines. Somewhere out there, Natalie is probably putting the kids to bed, reading stories and giving goodnight kisses. And here I am, alone with my thoughts and my regrets, trying to figure out how to face another day. But I will face it. Tomorrow, I'll get up and I'll go to work. And I'll do my best to be a good father and a decent person. I'll carry my burden and keep walking because that's the only choice I have left. I cheated with my neighbor and let the guilt ruin my home. This is my confession. And now, finally, after all these years, someone else knows the whole truth. I don't know if that changes anything, but somehow, tonight, it feels like it might.